want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I suppose I've met you on a number of occasions, and I just want to thank you for the work that you have done on this. Pat, I wonder if you could just tell me, under the apartment defect scheme, how much public money do you think will be dispensed in the context of that scheme?
This year or in globally?
Total.
Well, the estimate
a ballpark figure.
The estimate is 2.5 billion. I would think that's a soft estimate, to be frank. I think by the time it's all done, given that we're probably minimum 10 years, maybe 15, I think if there's much change out of 5 billion, we'll be doing well. Okay.
Would it be fair to say that OMCs will be the primary beneficiary of the bulk of that money?
Well, OMCs aren't, I mean, they're just the conduit.
No, but the payments will be made primarily through the OMCs.
Oh, so yes, absolutely. Yeah. So as my understanding is that in terms of what's envisaged in the legislation, is that the construct would be owners management companies would be the applicants for grants, and they would then get the grant, and they would then be responsible for undertaking. Yeah, they're going
to be one of the principal distribution mechanisms of something north of 2.5 billion.
Absolutely,
up to a figure.
Yes.
So we essentially have legal mechanism, legal entities that are distribution literally billions of euro.
Yes.
in public money, and yet the list of concerns, let's say, if we put it as mildly as that many people would have about OMCs around conflicts of interests of previous developers being on boards, about poor corporate governance on those OMCs. And I'm saying this not about any of the ones here, but we know that so much of the OMC structures, because it's based on volunteers, because it's based on company directors that come and go, that the need for a regulator is acute.
And even with those where you've got people with a lot of experience, and I'm talking about construction experience, trying to guide some of these works, there have been massive inconsistencies in terms of how defects works have been done, not out of any malice or badness, but just and shows the need for guidance and direction and support, which just isn't there at the moment.
Like, I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee. Like, you could see a hearing very easily filled with 2.5 billion being distributed through companies which are not formally regulated or don't have a proper overall regulatory structure.
Let me give you two cases in point. Like, I'm aware, for instance, and I know Sam would be aware of an OMC in Dublin where, a chair who used to own units no longer does, but he was getting a daily stipend, had an office paid for and provided for by the owner's management company, and he was running general meetings like a personal sort of fiefdom where they were online, and if somebody tried to get in to contradict him or to propose something, he would literally cut them off. Another case where, for instance, again in Dublin, but on the west side of Dublin, where two directors were paying themselves, and this is going back a number of years, 80 grand and 90 grand respectively, and they were also then awarding contracts to people who were close personal contacts. So, that's... Now, just to be clear, the majority, in my experience, are honourably run. Yeah. But the fact that the system is open to that, and we're talking about billions going into it, means that there's a risk from a public finances point of view.
A significant risk.
A very significant risk.
It really plays into your point, Deputy McAuliffe, that perhaps a condition of availing of government funding for defects is that you must register with a regulator. You must comply, make an annual return, have transparency.
You've jumped ahead of me, Brian, because I have to say it's very difficult to see any other situation where such significant amounts of money will be distributed, albeit with protections, and I accept there will be protections in the apartment defects system, but they'll be paid to a sector that we know has very significant reforms that are required. So I would be saying to the Department of Justice, if you leave this on your desk for too long, we'll be putting the blame on your desk when things go wrong. And if you don't move it to the Department of Housing, as I have to say, there's cross-party consensus on it. There's consensus certainly from the backbenchers in Fianna Fáil that it would be moved to the Department of Housing, because I think there is some appetite in the Department of Housing for all the reasons we've just described in order to deliver some of these reforms. And given that I have two colleagues but in both departments, I will be doing everything in my power to try and persuade both of them to make sure that the bureaucracy and the red tape doesn't get in the way here. Because I really feel, apart from all of the public spending element that I've put to you here, at the heart of all of this is people and where they live. And I recently had a very serious meeting with residents who are in a management company, and really the very basics of how a management company and an OMC should be run, we're not operating. You know, very basic levels of knowledge even among the people living there, and it was, you know, no fault of their own in many ways. And the only way for them to effectively succeed is to do a kind of a corporate takeover of the OMC. And that can lead to all of the issues that we spoke about around difference with neighbours and so on. And I'm particularly conscious of OMCs that are made up of apartment and non-apartment developments. Yeah. It's the one area of, you know, real conflict that I can see, that in essence many apartment based OMCs use fees gathered from non-apartment elements to fund the overall development. And I appreciate that's difficult to unravel. It's not an easy thing to say. But when people have signed the contract when they buy a house, they're bound then by the OMC, and you can be effectively locked into a tyranny of the majority, and that there could be unfairness in that.
And I think that's why, coming back to the review of the Act, because I would see the review of the Act as being, it's the third phase. The first phase, transfer of responsibility. Second one is then setting up the regulatory unit in the housing agency, and then armed with all of the information that would flow from good regulation, would inform an effective review of the Act. And I think one of the points you're making is very well made, because increasingly Paul Mooney made this I think you were at it, Deputy McAuliffe, in I think April, May last year, but Paul Mooney spoke at an event we had in Buswells, and he made the point that actually owners management companies, leaving aside the growth in multi-unit developments, the numbers of OMCs is rising dramatically, because a lot of new housing developments are now going to be governed by owners management companies. So this is something that is becoming an ever more present issue, rather than one that's an historical one. If you make
the comparison, for example, with the charity sector, you know, we to our detriment, the proper regulation wasn't put in place in some of those, and it resulted in very genuine organisations being mired in all sorts of different things. So I think the quicker we move on this, the better. I have to say, Brian, I really am taken by your suggestion that in order for people to get significant amounts of money through the department defects, that they should be registered and regulated. But the onus then is on government to have that established before those that distribution is made.
It's something we've suggested in informal discussions with some of the stakeholders involved, because they can't formally discuss this because the transfer of responsibility hasn't been executed. But we've made that point. It seems to me blindingly obvious that, like, already we have 214 at the last count owners management companies that have applied to the interim remediation scheme. It seems to me that they should, you know, as a matter of course, should have their annual reports, their annual financial returns, all the details of their directors, and that they should be registered as well. And that, in a sense, that's an easy way to actually begin to do that. Because at the moment, my understanding is how that works is that every month when the CRO publishes its new list of company registrations, people in the housing agency are literally sifting through that list to see, is that a management company? Is that a management company? And not all of them, it's not immediately obvious. And then they write to them, and the level of return to sender from those things is extraordinarily high. So that means that even the addresses given for those companies are not correct. And so
It seems an extraordinary situation. Chair, apologies, but what we might suggest is that on that issue of the assignment from one department to another, obviously pending a report from this meeting and so on, we might write to the department seeking that that would be expedited.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy. And give a bit of latitude there because we have time, I believe. Deputy O'Wynne, do you want